Hello, and welcome to Wallace's Mysteries of Antiquity. Subscribe to this series to join me in exploring the enigmas of our distant ancestors and try to come to tentative conclusions about them. This isn't one of my normal videos. I'm currently working on 3 follow-up videos for my Red Pyramid tour, looking at the 3 other pyramids that Pharaoh Snefru built, and I want to have all the scripts done together so I don't miss anything. I'm also a little under the weather, so in the meantime, I just wanted to talk about the archaeological content on YouTube. I've learned a lot through my channel, and it's a privilege to share what I learn and my own ideas with all of you. I thought it would be helpful to provide some context for the channel. Who am I, and why am I qualified to tell you about ancient mysteries? I live in New Jersey, but I grew up here. The woods of rural Pennsylvania was my playground as a kid, and my grandfather was a nature lover and one of the most curious men I've ever known. This is where I learned about caves, which spawned the well shaft video, ice and potholes, which was the genesis of Simpson's window ice theory. It's also why I was able to recognize bat urine in the Red Pyramid before reading it from Keith Hamilton, as I had them in my attic as a kid. I fish, bow hunt, my wife and I camp and hike with our 2 dogs whenever we can, although, don't tell her, we're both getting a little bit older now. Science and archaeology always interested me, and my parents always encouraged that. Ancient Architects posted an old documentary on his channel of the first robot to enter the Queen's Chambers shaft in the 90s. I specifically remember watching that on the Discovery Channel as a kid and being fascinated by the strange door at the end of it. Professionally, I'm a computer programmer. I've done a variety of jobs in telecom, advertising, philanthropy, education, mostly dealing with back-end code, but occasionally I'd work with processing images or video. For things like facial recognition or simple video call mixing, to more experimental things like making my boss an app that scored billiards from a camera above the company's pool table. This is why and how I was able to write the custom software that I use to get high-quality images from low-quality video. Right now, I work quality control for a company that makes chemical analyzers for microprocessor manufacturers. I largely perform code review and create custom testing and integration software. I occasionally contribute to the open source community. I'm past the point in my career where I feel the need to publish, though I've written a few articles in small journals in my youth. Unlike some other YouTubers, I've never been to Egypt, or even attended a lecture on the subject, as far as I can remember. I'm self-taught and just curious about our ancestors. The further back in time, the more interesting I find it. As an engineer, I'm a logical thinker with a particular set of skills at poking at the details. I'm skilled at following sources and finding original data. Let me tell you how a topic of research becomes a video on this channel. I often just give myself a virtual tour of the space through footage or pictures, and then sit and think about what each feature could be for. I ask my own questions and look for anomalies or other things that interest me, and try to come to my own conclusions before looking at the literature on the subject. Many times, what I thought matches pretty well. Oftentimes, I'll learn a new detail that'll make me sit back and give the whole thing another think before iterating. And usually, by the end of the process, most of my open questions have been closed, and I'd either revised my thoughts based on what was presented, or had already came to the same conclusion as the academics. It's those times where we didn't come to the same conclusion, or I still have open questions, that end up being Wallace's Mysteries of Antiquity. Lots of times, it's a question that simply hasn't been asked yet. When I disagree with what is published, it's because I came to my conclusion based on what I saw, and what was presented to me as an explanation either has a flaw that I will specifically point out, or simply was not convincing, and I present my theory as an alternative. I call myself a citizen scientist. Some call us independent researchers. I'm an amateur, combing over the scraps of the real deal. Writing a peer-reviewed paper can be a hassle, and for a mystery as small as a single stone, you might not even find a journal willing to publish it. There are citizen scientists in all fields, though some are more fruitful than others. In 2017, the astronomy community was completely abuzz with something called Tabby's star. If you're not familiar, it was a star that was periodically dimming and brightening in very bizarre ways that had no explanation, and could be a good candidate for an alien megastructure. Further observation confirmed it was just dust, most likely from a large comet that got ripped apart by gravity. But it's now one of the most studied stars, and Tabitha, who the star was named after, is a citizen scientist, not a professional astronomer. We, as citizen Egyptologists, aren't digging in the field, but looking at the data and going, that's strange. Has anybody noticed this yet? You, the viewer, count yourself as a citizen scientist, in my opinion. Even if you're just passively listening to science communicators, you're somewhere around here. Those of you who take your time to think beyond the video and comment further or contrarian viewpoints would be a little bit higher. Citizen scientists on YouTube, like Lines in Sand, Ancient Architects, History for Granted, and myself, may present new or contrarian hypotheses. We present our evidence and usually also explain our issues with the accepted theories. The theories we present, in order to be scientific, must not only explain the thing we are focusing on, but also fit with everything else that we know. And occasionally, some of us have the ability to perform more rigorous science in our particular area of expertise. Obviously, not every presenter fits neatly into a category. For example, Ancient Sites Girl is very knowledgeable, but hardly seems interested in speculating much and acts more like a tour guide. Mini Minuteman is straddling the line between citizen scientist and just plain scientist. And then there are channels like Debunking, who have some really out there ideas, but is still firmly on the citizen scientist side of the coin, accepting the mountains of evidence for things that we do know, and only wildly speculating within the gaps of our knowledge. On the other side of the coin are pseudoscientists, which is what prompted this video. These are everywhere on YouTube, and especially social media, and I want my audience to have the tools to discern between the two. Pseudoscientists usually present themselves as knowing more than the experts, and/or are being suppressed by them. Here's what they don't want you to know, or here's what the thing is, but they're hiding it from you because it upends their narrative. First of all, that's just plain not how science works. The concept of throwing out old ideas and replacing them with new ones is the process. The only thing that can disprove science is better science. It's so common that it even has a name, the Kuhn cycle. The idea that scientists are actively trying to keep their field here is absurd. The interesting stuff happens at the other end of the cycle. I know a lot of scientists. A paper that upends a whole field is a career-defining moment that most scientists dream of. It would lead to offers for professorships at some of the most prestigious universities, you'd be well on your way to tenure, all the grants you'd ever want, and you'd get your name attached to it. You'd be the scientist equivalent of a rock star. Every scientist I've ever met dreams of having a miracle year or writing a Principia Mathematica. Secondly, journals are not suppressing their ideas. Their ideas simply do not pass peer review. But they can present whatever they want. It took me a half hour to set up my YouTube channel. The barrier to entry is basically knowing PowerPoint. I'd argue that not only are they not being suppressed, they're actually being amplified by our current media landscape. These are entire series with big budgets that are available on Netflix, Hulu, and History Channel right now. You'll notice I'm not even logged into these services in the screenshots, so it's not using my history to show me these. It's just regular marketing. Whether willingly or not, how many of you have heard that the pyramid is a power plant? How many have heard or seen Graham Hancock speak? Now how many of you have read something by Zahid Hawass or Howard Weiss? Yeah, they're dry, they're pretty boring, and they're written for a particular set of people who share a lingo. Now, I've gone through them so you don't have to, and I try to add some entertainment to the science, but social media algorithms favor the more fantastical, so be wary of everything, especially if they aren't posting their sources, or, like in Graham Hancock's case, citing outdated sources. If you want to learn more about anything I present, I provide a list of sources in every description. One thing to be particularly aware of is that groups like pseudoscientists and conspiracists won't necessarily tell you what to believe. That's the do-your-own-research part. They only push you in one direction. What's more insidious is them telling you who not to believe. That's dangerous. Especially be aware when someone says something like, they are hiding something. Who is they? Egyptologists are not a cabal. Zahid Hawass is not their dictator. If someone finds a new chamber in the pyramids, we hear about it. Now, there are plenty of valid criticisms. I throw them myself. But I will call out a specific person or organization like the Ministry of Antiquities. They is a very quick transition to secret organizations, Illuminatis, and less savory worldviews. Conspiracy peddlers will prey on your lack of base knowledge. For most of us, things that happened hundreds or thousands of years ago are largely just voids in our knowledge. Voids that you can fill with pretty much anything as long as you say it with a level of authority and present it in a way that doesn't contradict your base. As I've become more knowledgeable about the actual people and day-to-day lives of ancient Egypt, the faster certain red flags pop out at me when listening to these things, and that's what I want for you. If you already have a good base, your intellect is far harder to shove bad intel into because you haven't yet accepted their initial premise. To use myself as an example, I have a significantly higher understanding of the physics of electricity than the average person, due to my profession and general interests. Even more so than an electrician, because they don't deal with quantum mechanical effects like we do with semiconductors. You don't know how many times I've seen claims that the outside of the pyramid is an insulator and the inside is a conductor. Look at this. This belief is everywhere, and I don't understand how. One doesn't particularly need to work with electronics like I do to know that granite is not a conductor. Here's its conductivity and a paper looking into detail on it. Even if it did somehow produce electricity, the entire structure is literally sitting on the Earth. It's grounded, so any power would simply dissipate into the planet. It's very easy to have large gaps in your knowledge. Sometimes this ignorance is simply you never looked into it before, which puts you about here. This is where we all must start for everything. We know nothing and are just slowly gathering data. Sometimes you learned something at one point, putting you in this group, but then some of the lines have changed because scientists have learned new things and refined their knowledge, making it appear contradictory to you. This is why it seems the easiest target for conspiracists are younger generations who haven't yet had the time to develop a foundational knowledge, or people who have not been to school for half a century. Looking at my analytics, I can see that a lot of my viewers are from the second category, and I commend all of you. Learning new things that is not essential to your everyday life, for most people, essentially stops around age 20. You viewers have to actively seek out educational content like mine and have to recognize that some of the foundations that you have need to be chipped away and replaced with new information. How many of you were taught in school or church that the Jews built the pyramid? They didn't. In the 90s, the workers' village was found and excavated. Furthermore, it's believed that the pharaoh in Exodus was probably Ramses II, so by the time of Moses, the Great Pyramid was well over 1,000 years old. We live in a golden age of information. Science communication is no longer bottlenecked by the size of lecture halls. One of the greatest physics presentations I've ever seen was by Richard Feynman. There was maybe 50 people in this room. If it weren't for the camera, his words would have gone out to those 50 people and then out into the general ether. Instead, over 100,000 people have seen this lecture. I get more views on a popular video in a few hours than most academics will get readers of a lifetime of a paper. The university setting and academic paywalls almost feel like they're shunning people away from scientific information, where charlatans broadcast loudly how they were also shunned and say they will tell you how it really is. However, that is not to say we should completely ignore or dismiss everything they say. Let me give you an example. If you watch footage of the north shaft of the king's chamber, one of the floor blocks is dug out. This was done in order to fit a machine that pumped fumes from the king's chamber after a methane reaction took place there. Remember, early explorers said the king's chambers was completely blackened with soot. This is from the methane explosion which powered the pyramid. This all sounds made up, because it is. I made it up myself. I don't want you to never listen to what other people have to say, even if their ideas are kinda out there. I just want you to have a good base knowledge to really filter what you hear, because there are two good pieces of knowledge there to pull out. When I'm presented with something like this, I dismiss the magical pump mechanism and the chemical reaction theory there, because I know of overwhelming evidence that it's a tomb, and, well, how did they get methane? But then I think, why was the king's chamber covered in soot? And why is one of the stone's bottoms cut out? The first question is easily answered with some contemplation. The only source of light until the modern day was fire. It's just thousands of years of candle and torch smoke. The other is a legitimate mystery, though. If I were to guess, I'd say the small blocking stone, known as the Gentenbrink door, was accidentally left in place when the next stone in the shaft was inserted. It was jammed and required the floor to be dug out to remove it. But again, that's really just a guess. I often have to weed through the wildest theories for the pictures I use, and I'm actively filtering out the stuff I know to be false and looking for these small nuggets of mysteries. Conspiracists actually tend to be some of the most aware people of anomalies in accepted theories or stones, because they're looking for any evidence of their idea, and that's what I want you to listen for. So definitely listen to everything, but expand your base to make filtering out the mysteries from the misinformation easier. Everywhere you look in Egypt, there is something mysterious, something we're not sure of. Maybe it's just, why is there a weird mark on a stone? You, the person listening right now, might have an obscure piece of information rattling around your brain to solve it. In my Red Pyramid video, I pointed out a mysterious cornerstone. Multiple people pointed out it was likely put there as an oversized block and cut down into place. John 6429, I think, closed this minor mystery, and Toten Benny said the same thing, acting as peer review. Great feedback to you both. This is what I love about having this channel and the community who watches it. I hope this video has been informative, and I promise to get back to our ancient ancestors in the next one. In the interim, here's a peek behind the scenes at how I actually get some of the amazing pictures that I share with you. This is from my previous video on the Red Pyramid. Ancient Sites Girl took her viewers on a tour of the monument, and at one point she pointed her camera at the ceiling. It's quite dark, but it's breathtaking, so I really wanted to get you guys a picture of it with full light. I can't just brighten it because I need more light information, so I start by downloading the full video in HD. First, I use VLC to capture a few frames where the camera isn't moving much. I will then stack these the way astronomers take pictures of dim objects. I use 8 in this image. I run my custom piece of software that I wrote for the Scanned Pyramids North Passage footage and select the first image as my anchor. I then align every other frame to this. As the camera does move slightly, it also kind of rotates. In the next little bit, you'll see me flickering back and forth between frames to line everything up properly. I noticed that some of the frames aren't lining up properly, so I doubled the resolution. Then I selected an area to crop, and I ran the algorithm that stacks all of the frames into an image with ultra deep color. It automatically stretches the color range to 255 for the display, but because the top is darker than the bottom, I need to use a feature I added for tunnels to allow me to blend 2 different color curve corrections together. This is a location and size of what will basically be a spotlight. Remember, I'm not simply brightening an image. I'm stretching an ultra-deep color curve and can now do the top and bottom separately. So the next minute or so, I'll show you me actually fiddling with the color correctors. Thank you for listening. Let me know if you have any videos where you think there might be hidden detail in dark areas, and subscribe to continue to investigate our distant ancestors with me.